Okay, so welcome to the second half, or if you've just joined us, welcome to Sangha Night. So this is week 5 of our current series, Timeless Truth in a Changing World. And it's the second evening on our parable from the White Lotus Sutra that we're looking at, the parable of the jewel in the garment. So last week I talked quite a bit about the first part of the parable I wanted to discuss. And well, the White Lotus Sutra is a 2,000-year-old discourse from the Buddhist scriptures, and it comes from the Mahayana phase of Buddhism. So let's look at the parable again and draw something out of it, draw some meaning from the parable. It's important to remember that parables are not literal truth. So we're not talking about real events that are really happening here in the parable. They're archetypal, they're mythical, they're symbolic. But if we allow them to, if we're open to them, they can speak very directly to us and our lives. We can really get the message from the parable, from this particular form of communication. So last week I talked about the need for us as practitioners to wake up to the sleep or drunkenness of our unawareness in life, which is represented by the drunken man in the parable, the drunken man who falls asleep, doesn't realize what he's doing, is very unaware, not clear about the value of life. This week, I want to talk about the priceless jewel itself that's been sewn into the garment, and how we grasp that priceless jewel and make use of it. So, as it's a short parable, again, I'll read it directly from the scripture for you, and you can just relax, take in the parable as I read it. Just see what effect it has upon you. World-honoured one, it is as if some man goes to an intimate friend's house, gets drunk and falls asleep. Meanwhile, his friend, having to go forth on official duty, ties a priceless jewel within the man's garment as a present and departs. The man, being drunk and asleep, knows nothing of this. On arising, he travels onwards till he reaches some other country, where, striving for food and clothing, he labours diligently, undergoes exceeding great hardship, and is content if he can obtain but little. Later, his friend happens to meet him and speaks thus: "Tut, sir! How is it you have come down to this, merely for the sake of food and clothing? Wishing you to be in comfort and able to satisfy your 5 senses, I formerly, in such a year and month, and on such a day, tied a priceless jewel within your garment. Now, as of old, it is present there, yet you, in ignorance, are slaving and worrying to keep yourself alive. How very stupid! Go you now and exchange that jewel for what you need, and for hereafter live as you will, free from poverty and shortage." So that's the parable. A man goes to a friend's house, gets drunk, falls asleep. His friend has to go to work. Before that, he ties a jewel, priceless jewel, in his garment. The man wakes up and heads off, looks for work, has a very hard time, bumps into his friend later who says, "Look, you fool, there's a priceless jewel in your garment. Go out there and go and exchange it and stop living in poverty." So once again, I'm not going to tell you what the parable means. I'm going to let you make your own connections with the parable. But I will indicate a few more thoughts that I've had about the parable and, well, see what you think of that. Last week we talked a bit about the state of drunkenness and sleep, which are well-known metaphors in the Buddhist scriptures for unawareness, for delusion. So this week we're going to look at grasping the jewel. What does that really mean? Waking up to the existence of the jewel and grasping this jewel. So we have a precious opportunity, and we've been told about the existence of the jewel by a friend, a good friend, who of course is the Buddha. He's tied that jewel into our clothing. And this jewel can give the poor man everything that he needs. So he makes use of it. He cashes it in and lives a much better life, free from poverty and hardship. So this is a parable, and the priceless jewel represents something. The question is, what's that? What does it represent? What does it really mean? Well, I don't think it means literal money and material wealth. I don't think it really means that. That's not really what the priceless jewel is about. What it really means, I think, is freedom. It means real freedom. It is often said in the Buddhist scriptures that if the ocean has one taste wherever you encounter it, the taste of salt, well, the Dharma has one taste, the taste of freedom. So by freedom we mean enlightenment. That's what we're talking about, enlightenment, the enlightenment of the Buddha. And there are quite a number of different terms for enlightenment, many different terms for enlightenment. Liberation is one, nirvana, the inconceivable emancipation, salvation, release, the open dimension of being. There's so many different terms, they all kind of indicate something. Freedom is one of the terms which seems to really communicate to us, something to us. And by freedom, I mean freedom from greed, from hatred and delusion, freedom from the endless round of birth and death that we're spinning on throughout our lives, freedom from all worry, all doubt, and all fear. So the Buddhist term for freedom is vimukti, vimukti. And this was the freedom that was experienced by the Buddha under the Bodhi tree 2,500 years ago, and then afterwards for the rest of the Buddha's life. It's also the freedom that thousands of the Buddha's disciples also experienced during their lives following the teaching of the Buddha. So his path to freedom is the Dharma, which he taught to his disciples and have come down to us here today in 2021. So how do we grasp that freedom? How do we grasp the jewel in the garment? There's many ways to answer this. And I was going to talk about freedom from our habits. I was going to talk about that tonight, but I've decided not to. I was reminded of a wonderful little sutta in the Udana, which is one of the very earliest scriptures in the Buddhist canon. And it's called the Meggiya Sutta. And really, it's about a slightly foolish and headstrong monk who is an attendant of the Buddha, who has fallen short. He's made mistakes, and he asks the Buddha for a teaching on how he might best progress. His practice is not progressing, and despite him making a lot of effort in some very good conditions. And well, the Buddha replies to him. And this is what he says. He says, when the heart's release is immature, Meggiya, 5 things conduce to its maturity. I'll just repeat that. When the heart's release is immature, Megillah, 5 things conduce to its maturity. He then tells Megillah of the 5 things. And the first is spiritual friendship, Kalyana Mitrata. The second is ethics, Sila. The third is talk about the Dharma, Dharma Kata. The fourth is applying your mind in meditation and in wider practice, which is Viriya. The fifth is insight into the rise and fall with the mind that penetrates the perfect ending of unsatisfactoriness, prajna. So these are the 5 things which lead to the heart's release, or lead to enlightenment, in other words. And these 5 things are what we must practice in order to grasp the precious jewel, just like Megillah. So I'm going to say a little bit about each of these 5 and then I'll conclude. I must say that when I read the Megillah Sutta, it reminds me so much of myself as a young man coming along to Buddhism. And I think I was quite foolish as well and inexperienced. And I often had good conditions and I wasn't making the best of them. I remember when I first encountered Sangha, this was almost exactly the kind of, exactly the teaching that he gave me at that time, which was a real surprise to me because before I encountered Triratna, I'd been very much into Zen Buddhism. And I expected it to sort of recommend that I spent several days kneeling in the snow, or him talking about the sound of one hand clapping or something like that. This is what I was kind of expecting. But instead I got these 5 things. I remember thinking, oh, that's a bit of a disappointment. That doesn't sound very exciting. And oh, right. But then, of course, when I actually spent a few years practicing these 5 things, I actually started to make a lot more spiritual progress. They are very, very effective. So yeah, Megillah reminds me quite a lot of my younger self, if you can imagine me being young. Might be quite difficult. So let's have a look, number 1, at spiritual friendship, Kalyana Mitrata. What does that really mean? This is perhaps the most important of the 5, because when we have spiritual friendship, the other practices will just follow directly from that. As we get to know the Sangha and people within it, there will be the benefit of friendship. Spiritual friendship is what can emerge when Buddhists get to know each other, through classes, retreats, study groups, one-to-ones, working together, and events like this one now we're engaging with now. In the Sangha, you might find yourself becoming friends with all sorts of people that are quite different from the usual social group which you feel comfortable with normally in life, that you're used to making friends with. In the Sangha, you might start to make friends with completely different kinds of people, of different ages, different backgrounds, and that's a really good thing. Friendship in the Sangha has all the benefits of ordinary friendship, with a lot more on top. There is someone there with whom you can share your feelings, your views, your inspirations, your challenges, and your experience of spiritual practice. And so there's someone you can really communicate with truthfully and openly, something that you may not have experienced before in ordinary friendship. And someone to practice with, actually practice meditation with, puja, study with. Someone that you can really listen to and someone who will really listen to you. Someone who will support you and share the ups and downs of the spiritual life with. Someone to extend your metta towards and feel that metta in return, just like we were extending metta this evening in the Metta Bhavana. There's said to be two types of spiritual friendship, what's called horizontal friendship and vertical friendship. So horizontal is people who are kind of roughly the same sort of level of experience of yourself as yourself. And in this kind of friendship, we find warmth and metta, we find support, sharing, pleasure, and losing our attachment just to ourselves. Our own self-obsession can get kind of loosened up a bit. And then there's vertical friendship. That's a friendship that you might have with someone who's quite a lot more experienced than you are in the spiritual life. And you can look for warmth and metta. You can learn from those people. You can gain inspiration from those people. Sometimes you can even receive a positive challenge from them and a positive influence. So there's so much more I could say. It's a very big subject, Kalyana Mishta, but one the Buddhists can really engage with. And it's a practice which I didn't have when I first came along as a young man. So spiritual friendship is one of the ways that we can grasp the priceless jewel, one of the ways that we can go beyond our own little ego. So let's look at ethical practice, sila. Ethics grows out of spiritual friendship. If it's a real Sangha that you're involved in, there will be ethics there. So you all know the 5 ethical precepts. I don't need to go over all that ground too much tonight. But I will say that the 5 precepts apply to body, speech, and mind. So that means everything that you do with your body, absolutely everything. Everything that you say or write or text or whatever, that's all included in speech. And then your mind, everything that you think, feel, it's all of you. It covers every bit of you. And there's 5 things that you're refraining from doing. Not taking life, not taking the not given, not acting with sexual misconduct, not speaking falsely, not intoxicating your mind. And then there's 5 things that you're developing instead. Loving kindness, metta, generosity, contentment with your sexual situation or lack of it, truthful speech, and mindfulness. So you're developing all those things. And if you're able to do that, then that results in an improvement, the development of wisdom and compassion in your practice. If we go on retreat, we'll chant the refuges and precepts in the morning to remind ourselves how fundamental they are. So the 5 precepts are the practical application of going for refuge to the 3 jewels. If you practice the precepts sincerely, it will show. It will show in your behavior. Your friends will notice, your family will notice, your partner will notice, your children will notice, your colleagues will notice, because your behavior will change. I can remember many, many years ago telling my parents that I was a vegetarian now, and that was a permanent change. And they just ignored me completely. And I remember traveling home to see my parents at Christmas, and they put on the Christmas turkey and everything for me. And I said, look, I won't be eating it. Sorry, I'm a vegetarian now. I did tell you that. And this happened 2 Christmases in a row. And I remember my mother saying to me, gosh, you're really serious about this, aren't you? You really are taking this really, really seriously. I said, yeah, I am. So it will show. If you really practice the 5 precepts, people will notice. you'll become more truly human. You'll be stronger, more trustworthy to yourself and to others, and your self-esteem will have a solid foundation. But practicing the 5 precepts isn't just something that we chant or agree to. It's a skill which you have to learn. You have to really understand and apply that skill in your life in a real way. So let's move on now to the third one, the third way that we can grasp the priceless jewel, and that is Dharma discussion or study, Dharma Kata. And this is another of the 5 ways we grasp the priceless jewel. So the Dharma is the blue jewel, the truth. We must find ways to learn this Dharma. The Dharma is the Buddha's teaching. We must find ways to learn and understand it more deeply. So we need to listen to it. We need to reflect upon it. We need to meditate upon it. In essence, the Buddha's teaching can be summed up in a few sentences. However, the scripture, the literature of the Buddha's teaching is sometimes said to be 30 times larger than the Bible. So we've got to find a middle way somewhere. Private reading of the Dharma and studying the Dharma privately is a good thing. It's probably even essential. However, it's not enough. There's a bit of a danger with just only reading the Dharma and studying it on your own. What can happen is you can go down a particular narrow path of choice with personal study, and you can misunderstand. In Buddhism, this is called grasping the snake by the tail. If you get on try and grasp a snake by its tail, you'll find it'll turn around and bite you. Whereas you grasp it just behind the head, I've never actually done this, it's quite safe. So we have to grasp the Dharma by the head because we don't want to get bitten. And one of the ways that the Dharma can bite you is in that way you can just simply misunderstand it and be applying things in the wrong kind of way. And that's not good. So Dharma Kata, studying the Dharma, is another Sangha activity. You need a group context. You need a qualified teacher and you need peers. So you need a guide to the Dharma. You need to interact in some kind of group. Because Dharma study is not academic study, which was quite a relief to me. You know, you're looking at a school dropout here, very unqualified schoolboy. However, I am able to understand the Dharma because the purpose of the Dharma is to apprehend the truth. That's the whole purpose. And so that you can practice that truth yourself in your own practice. It's not just about gaining knowledge. So we can clarify the Buddha's teaching and put it into practice in our own lives. But the study group is where we really understand and test that knowledge and take it on, that knowledge, so that we can benefit ourselves and so that we can benefit other people. The fourth way that we can grasp the jewel, recommended by the Buddha, is applying your mind in meditation and in general practice. So this is usually called Viriya. Viriya means energy or effort in the spiritual life. And the Buddha mentions meditation here because meditation is a very, very important form of practice and you do need energy for it. However, Viriya applies more widely than that in the spiritual life. It applies to all aspects of the spiritual life. It means ethical practice, as I've just mentioned. It means Dharma study. It means spiritual friendship, ritual and devotion, and going on retreat. So even wanting to practice the Dharma requires a certain amount of effort. Practicing the Dharma requires motivation, energy, enthusiasm, interest. It requires all those kinds of things. You've got to want to do it. It won't work otherwise. You won't get around to doing very much otherwise. So where does all this energy come from in order to do that? We want to make this kind of effort. We want to practice Viriya. Where does that all come from? Well, it's interesting. If you're inspired and you're interested, then energy will often be there. However, Bhante Sangharakshita, my teacher, tells us that by being alive at all means that you're actually a mass of energy. You're a boiling fireball of energy just by simply being alive. That's what he tells us. But it doesn't always feel like that, does it? I don't know about you. I don't always feel like a fireball of energy. Sometimes you can find you even lack energy for the spiritual life, which you've become so interested in and fascinated by. So the question arises, why is that? Why is it like that? And he tells us that one of the reasons for that is we've got all this energy, but it's often blocked. Our energy is blocked, or it could be too coarse and it needs to be refined. And also, and this is very often probably the case, it's dissipated. The energy that we have is dissipated in questionable pursuits. Anyway, that's a whole other story. That's a whole other talk. In fact, I haven't got time to go into all that right now. The main thing to grasp is that we do need energy, and in the spiritual life, and that energy needs to be free-flowing in order to really engage with practice. We've got to want to do it, and we need that energy to be available to us to make the effort. I remember when once again, as a young man, when I first came along and encountered order members in the Triratna order, I got to know some really quite elderly order members at the time. I was a young man. But one of the things that really impressed me so much was what they did. They were always teaching and giving talks and leading retreats, and some of them looked really old, but they had all this energy. And I thought, where does this energy come from? It wasn't really flashy energy. They weren't spraying it around like I was doing as a young man. They had a steady, consistent, mindful energy, which was just always available to them. So I think this is different. Viriya is different from ordinary energy or just youth. It seems that Viriya has nothing to do with age. Finally, we come to wisdom, prajna. Wisdom, the seeing of the rise and fall with the mind that penetrates. So this mysterious and wonderful faculty that is able to really see into reality, is able to really see into the truth, is something that we need to develop within ourselves. And it penetrates into the reality of the world that we live in. But we do not see the reality of the world that we live in. So we have to learn to do that. When we start to become open to how the world really is, we can penetrate it, and we will find that the priceless jewel is resting in the palm of our hand. So what do I mean? What do I mean by all that? Developing prajna. Well, I mean the reality of everyday life is not quite how we think it is. The truth is not quite how we think it is. So I'm going to demonstrate this. I'm going to read out a very short sutta called the Upajjhatana Sutta. And it's called the 5 Contemplations for Everyone. So That means everyone means everyone. It means everyone should think about this. But just kind of notice your thoughts and feelings as I'm reading it out. Just notice how you receive this particular information. So the first contemplation says, I am sure to become old. I cannot avoid aging. Number 2, I'm sure to become ill. I cannot avoid illness. Number 3, I am sure to die. I cannot avoid death. Number 4, I must be separated and parted from all that is dear and beloved to me. Number 5, I am the owner of my actions, heir of my actions. Actions are the womb from which I have sprung. Actions are my relations. Actions are my protection. Whatever actions I do, good or bad, of these I shall become heir. So that's it. That's the 5 contemplations for everyone. It's a deeper penetration of the truth, and the truth that's contained there leads to a liberation that can be gained if we embrace these truths. So this level of wisdom will require considerable practice for most of us, but that's the kind of everyday contemplation we need to take on. So these are the 5 things recommended by the Buddha to the monk Meghiya, which lead to the heart's release, or in other words, grasping the priceless jewel, or breaking free from a limited view of the world. Spiritual friendship, ethical life, Dharma discussion, energy in applying the mind, wisdom that penetrates. So these are well-known practices within the Sangha. They're tried and tested over millennia. So next week, Samudra Ghosha will be talking to us about discovering who we really are. So that's something not to miss next week, on the 3rd and final evening, on the parable of the jewel in the garment from the White Lotus Sutra. So we've got breakout groups now, and I've got 2 questions for you. The first is, which of the 5 practices attracts you? And the second is, which of the 5 practices seems challenging? So thank you, and I will finish now.